Hello and welcome to the Bedroom Studios podcast, the podcast where we talk about what goes on behind the scenes in a musician's world and bridge the industry gap by bringing their stories, expertise, and advice to early career artists. Subscribe to join us for a fun chat about life as a creative person, tips and tricks for pursuing an artistic career, navigating the music industry, and more. I am your host, Emma, and today I will be interviewing Shreya Jha. Shreya is a Toronto-based composer, playwright, and medical student with a keen interest in the intersections between music and science. Her first musical, Statistics, debuted in 2019, won the 2020 Adams Prize for Musical Theatre at the Toronto Fringe, and was shortlisted for the Playwrights Guild of Canada's Robert Beardsley Award. Statistics is presently being developed by Shifting Ground Collective after receiving a Canadian Council grant. Shreya's research interests include music and dementia and the impact of music on developing brains. She has developed a composition program at Systema Toronto and has been published in Frontiers in Psychiatry. I had such an amazing time interviewing Shreya. We talked about her musical journey, the play she is currently working on, her composition process, her experience applying for grants, and the intersections between music and science in both her fields in medicine and as a playwright. I hope you enjoyed the episode and thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy you're here.
I'm happy to be here.
Yay. So for those of you who don't know Shreya, she is a force of nature, and I really would love to hear more about tell me your life story, I guess. What was your musical journey like from when your life story of music and all of your things that you do today that led you to today?
Okay. That's quite a bit further back than I have gone in a while. But the story of music and science and all the things now. So I grew up as a musician, as I think many of us did. I started piano around 5, and then I added violin after many years of begging, I think around 8. And I was always very involved in music in high school. I started composing pretty early too, and then I think I got more serious about that in high school when I had a really encouraging teacher who was able to help me kind of gain some of those skills. I think I knew from a pretty early age that I wanted to go into music in some capacity. I would always say as a child I think I wanted to be a writer and a composer. The writer part kind of fell out, but it came back in a weird way with the playwriting, so that's fun. The science component didn't come so much till high school. I think science always came easier to me than the more humanities-based courses. And I had an interest in it. It made sense to me, and I thought that there might be a really cool intersection there between music and health science, or music and science in particular. A lot of at least in my spheres and in my life, a lot of the conversation around music and science was pretty new then, so it felt really groundbreaking. So I thought it would be fun to pursue both in some capacity. And so that's when I applied to undergrad for both music and science, hoping to do both, and was met with a decent amount of resistance in most programs. It seemed like there weren't a lot of existing programs for that, and people weren't too fond of the idea of someone bending the rules. U of T was the one place that it actually seemed plausible, largely thanks to the music school registrar, who kind of outlined a path that I could pursue actually a full music degree, Bachelor of Music, and a full science degree, Bachelor of Science, in a number of years. I think I was told 7 at the time, and I was like, how about we make it 5? I didn't fully know what I was getting into, honestly. Like, anyone who I described that to would tell me that objectively sounds nuts, and I think somehow that fell on deaf ears, and by the time I fully grasped the reality of what that meant, like pursuing 2 degrees in a fixed number of years, I was kind of in too deep and too stubborn to let it go. But it was great. It was very much the perfect program for me doing the dual, and I did finish it in 5 years.
Wow, congrats.
Thank you. 2021 grad, very fun year to graduate. It wasn't. We didn't have a grad ceremony. But I think so. Through doing both of those allowed me to really figure out where I would like this intersection to go. And medicine was always in the back of my mind as a possibility, but honestly, I felt like I had a little bit of an aversion to it in early years because it seemed like, oh, this is so dry. It's so much work for not a ton of reward. It's not really what I want to do, and there's no room for music in it. And then, so what I thought I would do is I would either pursue some kind of like full music path, or I would do music and science via academia. As I discovered musical theater and kind of moved away from primarily composing classical music, I grew less fond of the soul music path because I thought like playwriting and musical theater works so much better when you incorporate it with other things. And I think I realized that the kind of impact I wanted to make would be much better served through medicine than through academia. And I learned that a lot of the things that I thought about medicine, about it being dry and not person-centered and no room for music, like none of those things were true at all. So that's what brought me to medicine, which I think if you had told like first year undergrad me that I would end up in medicine, I would have been very surprised. Yeah, so I applied in my final year of undergrad and got into U of T, and now I'm wrapping up my second year, and it's been really great. I think it's very much been the right path for me, and I think I bring an interesting perspective to it with my musical work, and it allows me to really pursue my musical work on my own terms, very much engaging in only the parts I would like to, because that's what I have the time for. And it feels like the playwriting career has also been going pretty well for the most part, alongside medicine. So that is how I ended up here. Stay tuned to see where we go from here.
That's awesome. That's so cool how you're able to do the 2 degrees, because I don't know, I feel like there's that stereotype of you can either go into arts or medicine, mm-hmm. and you have to give one up once you graduate high school.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I feel like that kind of exists on every level. People are like, okay, give it up after high school, give it up after undergrad, after mm-hmm. grad school even. And the whole like left-brained, right-brained thing. Oh, yeah. I think people definitely have different strengths, and there are some people that very much identify with like being an artist, being freer, more open-minded versus being more logical and analytical. But the dichotomy just drives me nuts. Also, like speaking as a neuroscience major and graduate, that's not a thing. The right brain, left brain thing is not a thing. So yes, I love not splitting people into boxes.
Debunking all the myths.
Yes.
Something that I always wonder is and I'm sure this is the question you get all the time, is how do you manage your time doing all of this? Because you do a lot, and I struggle managing my time doing just like the one thing I'm doing now. So like how do you navigate that?
Mm-hmm. I think managing time is a struggle, like to no matter how much or how little you have going on. Honestly, it's never quite perfect. I think honestly the baseline of the undergrad of having these 2 very different things that worked my brain in 2 very different ways, and having to jump back and forth between that very much primed me for right now. It was definitely an adjustment at the beginning of medicine, to have to study in a different way, to have to dedicate time in a different way, but yeah, it was like a kind of brain training of like I can switch very quickly from cranking out a lead sheet for a musical to like learning a lecture on cancer. A big part of the time management, I think, is kind of in undergrad. I think it was a big acceptance of like, okay, I am going to be really busy, and that's okay, because that's something that's worth it. And I think that helped me a lot more in first and second year undergrad. That's always a work in progress. Like in third year, I struggled with that again, thinking like this is still too much in terms of like it didn't work just to tell myself I have to be busy and be okay with that. But in a lot of ways, one can serve as a break from the other. It's like when one way of thinking is not working out for me, it's good to turn to a task I have for the other thing, and then it's fun to turn to the things I have that combine the 2. Like my research is the current project I'm working on is about music, evoked memories, and dementia, or my musicals. A couple of them, 2 of the 4 that I have, are actually about like scientific topics. Statistics is about women in science and the story of the discovery of DNA and current day pre-medical students. And the one I'm working on right now to premiere at the end of July, called The Last Piece, is about the story of an individual actually getting dementia and what that looks like. So I think that so that kind of helps with some of the fatigue. I think the fact that everything's different. But that's not to say that you don't need regular breaks. Like, I'm not about to come in here with some hustle culture of, like, you don't need breaks when you love what you do. No, you still need breaks.
I find that there's a line where it's, like, that sort of that line of, like, if I cross it, then I get burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you relate, but for me, it's, like, a big part of managing all of the things I have to do is knowing how close I am to that line and taking a step back when I feel the burnout coming on.
Yeah, that's such an important that's such an important kind of awareness, I think, and I think a lot of people don't know where that line is, and that line can shift a lot of the times. I think a lot of it is also acceptance of like what I need to do right now may not necessarily be what I want to do right now, which can go both ways. It can go in the what I need to do right now is learn this lecture, and what I want to do is like watch Netflix. That is unfortunately not what it is. Well, like what's possible, but it can also be like what I need to do right now is pass out for a nap, while what I want to do is get ahead on my work because I'm so behind. That's another thing that's a little hard to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's there. I think I'm still, as most of us are, like trying to figure out what works burnout wise and what doesn't. But it definitely helps for me that the two things I do are so different from each other. And I think a lot of what I do, a lot of what helps with kind of replenishing is that both of those things are very social. I mean, studying is not very social, but medicine, you're always working with other people. Music, you're always working with other people. And I have a lot of really great peers and friends and colleagues that I love to spend time with. And I think that really helps replenish me, knowing that I'm going to get to do this with these people, which is another big part of why I didn't love the idea of going into academia, because I knew it would be a lot more isolating, at least for the first few years.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know, like, I guess, would you consider yourself an extrovert or an introvert?
I go back and forth all the time. Like,
me too.
Someone actually asked me yesterday, a friend asked me yesterday what my MBTI is, like my Myers-Briggs type. And I was like, I am a blank NFJ, because the I and E goes back and forth all the time. I think when I took it during COVID, I was an E, but that might have been because I've missed social interaction. I really don't know. I have components of both. I think I'm like in the middle.
I consider myself an extroverted introvert, which
That's a thing. That's a thing. People say
it could be tricky sometimes, though, because it's like, I really want to be with people, but I can't handle all of the interaction.
Yeah, it's like that reset time by yourself. Even if you're like working or doing something, just I think knowing you're at ease by yourself, like that's necessary.
Yeah, and even that's tricky. Just being okay, being alone. You know, but yeah, and it's like, I don't know, I guess like science and music, although they're sort of primarily social, there are elements of it that require you to be by yourself. If you're practicing or studying.
Exactly, yeah. Studying is a big one. I know some people group study, but if I want to be productive, I can't group study. A lot of music writing. I write primarily by myself. Like, I have a few collaborators, but my main musicals I write by myself. And a lot of that is just like gremlin in her bed at 2 a.m. writing out a lead sheet or a script. So yeah, like those components are done by yourself, but it's a nice contrast with the parts that you do with others, I think.
Yeah, and it's nice to be able to do a lot of different things within the things that you like to do. Just keeps it fresh.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that you have a musical that is in the works right now. Can you tell us more?
Yes. So this one, it's called The Last Piece. We actually have callbacks tomorrow as of the day that we are recording this, which is very exciting. I came up with this idea in summer 2020, but I was in the middle of writing one of my other musicals at the time, so I was like, okay, I'm going to shelve this and come back to it later. It was about a couple where one gets dementia and the other is trying to preserve the first individual's memories by going through the memories with their partner, and in doing so we kind of see a retelling of their love story and everything that they've been through. But then I decided why have them be happily married when you can have them be divorced and make it extra complicated? And honestly, I think that was a slightly easier story for me to write. It was a bit easier to access those emotions. So it is about a divorced couple. They haven't heard from each other in years, and our protagonist, a woman, gets a call from the doctor's office that her ex-husband, who again she hasn't spoken to in years, has just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and the healthcare team kind of assumes she's going to be the primary caregiver. So she's kind of like stuck with going through all these memories with this person to help with her ex-husband to help him preserve that is actually shown to be really important in Alzheimer's disease, that kind of cognitive rehearsal and going back through your memories to strengthen them improves their understanding of who they are and can slow decline. So she's stuck kind of going through this with him. The audience is seeing a retelling of those memories or piecing together the love story, all while she's dealing with the fact that she has unresolved feelings about this relationship and what that means for her. And we see her journey through that as she struggles, as we see him decline. And I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but I think she has some realizations about her feelings about her relationship, the nature of memories, and like what it means to help someone through that kind of disease.
Wow, that's really intriguing. I'm very excited to hopefully watch it
I hope you can too. July 28th and 29th.
Ooh, is that on a weekend?
It is a Friday and a Saturday.
Okay, that might work.
Excellent.
I'll do my best. How do you decide what story is worth pursuing when you're writing a musical? Because I assume it takes a really long time to write a musical, and it's like, do you ever like, oh, this is one that I'm going to carry through to the end, or does it sort of happen as you go?
Yeah, I honestly wonder this about other people as well. Like looking at a lot of the musicals that are popping up, and like new works that have made it to the big stage. I wonder like who thought of making that a musical. Sometimes in awe of like, wow, like who came up with this idea that's so interesting and it works so well. And sometimes like, really? Like, is that the musical that we're writing? Okay, I guess. And sometimes you're pleasantly surprised. So I really think almost anything can be a good story if you tell it right. Interestingly, I think that storytelling and crafting a story is probably the component that I struggle with the most because, I mean, I'm a trained composer. Lyrics kind of have always come relatively easily to me. I wrote a lot of poems as a child, and that transitioned into lyrics, and that feels really natural. But story is a challenge, and I'm always kind of trying to learn and get better. But in terms of coming up with ideas, for each of the ones that I came up with, I think I did have a little bit of a eureka moment of like, oh, that's something I want to do. But once that idea happens, there is so much kind of like spewing words, and I always come up with a word vomit document. I have one for each of the shows, so it's kind of fun. I never delete anything from them, so it's kind of fun to look back and think like, oh, this is what statistics looked like in summer 2018, or this is what connections looked like in summer 2019. And in doing that, it's a lot of kind of like spewing out what are my own ideas about the story, what do I want to tell, what do I want the audience to feel, and through a lot of that, it's almost like you throw like it's almost like a sand castle where like you get a massive amount of sand and you throw it all on the ground and then you have to like shape it and plug away at it. So I think of it more as like I try to throw in a plethora of ideas and make something out of them. And sometimes I think that can show in that my stories feel like they have a lot of ideas in them, or it feels like there's not as clear a movement. But I think I'd like to think that that's something everyone struggles with storytelling. So that tends to be how I do that. That's similar to how I did this for the last piece. I always joke that I don't remember a lot of my like the writing process because it feels like I'm just like agonizing over it and then it somehow happens. But I think these have been common threads through them. The idea of just like throwing so many ideas out there and seeing what happens. That tends to be how I work. I know not everyone works that way.
Yeah, I used to do that a lot with songwriting, and then it's always the best feeling when something you came up with one week connects so nicely with something you came up with at a different time, and you can sort of extrapolate all those little pieces pieces and put them together in the last piece.
Yeah, nailed it. Yeah, exactly. I think songwriting is very storytelling based, like discipline as well, and I think that very similar idea there.
Yeah. And so how often would you say that like you compose? Is it something you do on the go, or do you have to sort of sit at your piano and write?
It's so variable. I know a lot of my like colleagues from undergrad composition and a lot of the profs would say like set aside time every day or every couple days. Usually in undergrad it was every day, like every day to write, like a dedicated amount of time. I never did that. I think some of my friends actually would say that, like, yeah, it's scheduled composition time helped them, but as much as I'd like to blame it on like, oh, I was busy, I had a lot of things to do, like, yes, I did, but so did everyone else. I think it's just wasn't how I worked. But at the same time, like, I am someone that if you tell me like, okay, I need a song in a number of hours, I can get something out. It probably won't be good, but I can get something out. Like, I can generate material really fast, and I think that's been a strength of mine. So a lot of it is actually on the go. Connections, which is another one of my musicals that you played in, just now in March. When I wrote the first version of it in 2019 summer, I was commuting to a job in Mississauga, and I would sit on the UTM shuttle bus for probably a total of over 2 hours a day, like hour there, hour back, something like that. And that was where a lot of my writing got done. So very much like in those little moments, sometimes that's really good for generating ideas. Writing song lyrics, I think, like, if it works in those moments, you can get a lot done. But there are other times when I am coming up with melodies or themes to tie a show together, because I value like motivic unity a lot in my shows. And I for those I do need to sit at the piano. So usually I will schedule. I'll think like, okay, especially, you know, if I'm visiting home, like my parents have that piano there that I have a constant access to. I'll think like, okay, I'll be home for this day. I have to make sure to go spend some time on the piano. But a lot of the other times it's like it's when it happens. And one practice I actually came up with during COVID was I would go to, because we couldn't go anywhere. Everyone was like, I just want to go somewhere. I would go to a park just a couple blocks from my house and just sit and write there. So I guess that was a little bit scheduled and like getting into a nice environment. But that was because during that time you had that luxury of time. So it's a very long-winded answer to say yes to all of the above.
Yeah. That's really cool. That's always something I wonder, because that's something I've always struggled with composing, I guess, or like composing things for instruments. I don't do it very often because I don't set aside the time. And there's sort of that resistance of like, oh yeah, I want to be composing, but then when you actually go to sit down, it's like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that is hard. I think I would definitely feel that if I were someone who like was told to schedule it or had to schedule it. But I think after a while, having gone to school for it and just getting those skills, like, I figured out what worked for me, and I knew I was generating material and that it was working out okay. So I think that over time, I think as you get to know yourself and your writing style, you can work in a way that serves you best.
Yeah, like even just figuring out, like, I know for me, I think there's like a time of day where I feel most creative. And if I can access that and like make time at the time where I know that I'll be able to generate ideas, it's so much easier.
What is that time of day for you?
What I've realized about myself is that if I can, I like to take my time to get ready in the morning and start my day.
That's so fair.
And have it be really chill. And so once I do that, if I have time in the morning as like the first thing I do, and I don't have too much going on in the afternoon, then I can be really creative in that sort of like mid-morning after I wake up. Or in the late afternoon, evening before I go to bed because I'm a night owl.
Me too.
And so by morning,
Me
I
too.
mean like 10 o'clock.
You are talking to the right person. Yes, me too. Medicine is an interesting discipline to be in with that. But that is interesting. I always assume, I guess, night owl means your creative time happens at like absurd hours of the night,
No,
which definitely has
not
been
for
the
me.
case for me sometimes. Like a lot of my one musical of mine, 18 Palace Road. Well, they're all coming up. This is so convenient.
We'll link any links you have.
Oh yes, I will send those. That one I orchestrated almost entirely between the hours of 12 and 2 a.m.
Wow.
Which is a mix of kind of where I was at that point in life. And like, this was summer 2021. I wasn't working in person at that point. And that was like, I was able to do that. And two, just like, that was when I did feel creative. But I guess, yeah, it's good to hear that a night owl could plausibly have more creative time in the morning.
Yeah. Because I don't know.
That's an inspiration.
I'm
for
at
me.
that period of life right now where I finally get like kind of a decent amount of sleep, and I prioritize that. So if it gets too late at night, then I just get too tired. Like I don't have that, you know, like you have that like second wind late at night sometimes.
That second one is my undoing. I feel like that's what makes me a night owl.
Yeah. I dip at like 8, and then I get a second wind until maybe like 12 or 1, and then I go to sleep. So it's that time is like, it's all sort of shifted. But I don't know, maybe it was just because like when I was doing a lot of stuff, like after breakfast, it was because I had time at that time to be creative. Whereas like, you know, I don't always have it then. So it was nice to sort of have just like, oh, I don't have to do anything right now. I'm going to play piano.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to ask was, so you wrote the musical, but then how did you bring it from just being this thing that you had created to actually being performed?
Yeah, man, it truly does feel like that's like the mystery box of
Yeah.
like input, something happens, output. I think one thing that is really helpful in that is that a lot of my musicals, at least in their first iteration, were developed in the student sphere, like through student theater. The one that is actually not being done through student theater is the last piece, so that's going to be interesting. But I can speak on how that process has been different in just a little bit. So with student theater, you have like you apply through one of the student societies. You're like, okay, we'll accept your show. These are the dates that you're gonna have, and you just know the show has to be done for that time. So usually, as I was writing, I would find, either as I was writing or after, just as the script was freshly done, I would find a director, or someone would find me a director, and I would work with them to put together the rest of the team, and that was it. We just kind of, I think it was such a challenge that each of my directors had to take on, like take the script that literally has not existed before the last couple months and do something with it. And I've had so many that have been so amazing to work with. I have to shout out the most recent director of Connections, Haley. Like she brought things out of, I mean, that also wasn't the first edition of the show, but she brought out things out of that show that I didn't even know were there. Like she did an absolutely incredible job. So a big part is that kind of collaborative relationship with the director off the bat. I think you need to know that you can provide them enough information to make sure that your vision of the show is there, but also leave room for them to have their vision. So for pretty much every single one, I'd give them the script. They'd ask me whatever questions they'd have. We'd come up with a bit of a process together. In my earlier days, I would music direct my shows a lot. Now I don't do that anymore. So I'm very much only in the playwright seat. And then we start. I mean, we pick a couple scenes and songs we want to see people do. We put out auditions. Students will audition in a timely manner. In the case of Fringe, which was statistics last year, that was a little bit of a shorter time frame, but it's the same idea. You know, these young actors audition, you pick them, and you rehearse it bit by bit, and it always feels like it's never quite going to come together, and then suddenly, somehow it does.
With every performance
exactly.
of anything.
Yeah. So for all the other ones,
panic moment.
Yeah, the panic moment. I feel like I didn't have it for Connections this time around. I think other people definitely did, but I think I just wasn't as involved this time around. I was in such useless playwright mode.
I had a panic moment.
You had a panic moment?
I did.
I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah.
Yes, that's good.
Just lock yourself in the practice room.
It's one of those. Yes, perfect. So it is very much like a input question mark output, because when it's the student sphere, it is there's not a lot of edits happening once that script is done, because you're just hitting the ground running. And for statistics at Fringe, I kind of had conversations with both the director and the music director, and also another really great team I had there for maybe a month or 2 months before we started auditioning people. But yeah, once we started auditioning, it was more or less set in stone for that performance. Last piece is slightly different now, because we're auditioning, like we have callbacks tomorrow. I have the whole script outlined in a lot of detail. I have about half of it actually written out, and I don't have a ton of the sheet music written out at all. And I just had a meeting with my director on Monday, who is also kind of doing some dramaturgy of this, dramaturgy is like kind of editing and probing and asking questions and facilitating the environment for the playwright to make those edits. And I think that's going to be a much more ongoing process for this show, because it is so new. Like, all my other shows are new. This one it's literally being created as we speak. It's going to be like, I'm going to get input from the director, from the actors. They'll be getting a lot of things as we go. Hopefully in a way that's not stressful and rather feels like collaborative and good. But I think that might mean that there's a lot more editing of the show as we go, and there's a lot more of me actually putting in the time to make it a better show, to get those new editions of it throughout that process. So that's interesting. That's definitely new for me. Editing has always been a bit difficult, because I think once you see the show a certain way, you can't picture it another way, and I have to take so much time away from it before I edit it. But I think hopefully this will break down some of that, the idea that it can all be malleable, especially when it's the first version of the show.
Yeah. And so, like, was it more of like a conscious choice of, we're going to just go into this and we'll make it more collaborative as we go? Or was it a case of, your show's going to be on this date and that was sort of fixed and you kind of had to just go straight in, even if you would have wanted more time to finish writing?
Yeah, honestly, it was probably mostly the latter. Like, most of my fall semester was spent trying to confirm dates for both Connections, which we just wrapped up in March, and the last piece. And I was looking at a couple different avenues, couple different grants, and so it was very much application season. And as everything kind of like shook down, I knew that Connections was going to be up with Trinity College in March through the Student Sphere. Statistics is my other show. I already knew that was going to be developed through a really cool new organization called Shifting Ground Collective in March. And then I learned kind of over the winter break both that we had gotten some grants for the last piece, and that I had gotten a confirmation from the venue that I had been in conversation with for months that they could book us in for the end of July. And at that point, I was like thinking like, okay, so the next 3 months of my life are going to be largely spent working on my 2 other shows and school, because that's a thing. And so what is the last piece going to look like? I knew it was going to be a small show, like small scale, small cast, all of that, and not too long. So I was like, okay, that's already not super daunting. But then I think at that point I thought, let's embrace this more collaborative nature of this. Let's really kind of bring in the music and science, the idea that it's an exploration, because this is the first time this show is existing, let alone going up. It's okay if it gets totally changed after this. So my main hope is with that right now is that I don't end up stressing out my colleagues and actors by it being such a like delivered, like these deliverables being received so close to the actual deadline, but it's not the first time that something like this has been the case, so I think it'll be okay. I think we'll manage. And we have some really, really great actors auditioning. I'm very excited for tomorrow.
That's really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you frequently revisit your shows and change things after they've gone up? Or is it kind of like they go up and that's it?
I never want it to be the latter, but like I said, editing is so hard. Like I always want, especially because each of my shows have gone up in the student space, I always want it to be the first of many. And like the idea that, okay, this is almost like a workshop presentation. We're going to see what worked, what didn't. I'm going to edit it and I'm going to look for other opportunities. But when I get to the editing, it's almost like this big question mark of, okay, now what? So for example, with statistics, we went up for the first time in February 2019 at the U of T Drama Festival. And after that, I was like, okay, well, the book closed on that for now. I'm going to move on to writing Connections. And like literally less than 2 months after we closed, I was starting to write Connections. That was also like the first year of me discovering musical theater. So I was like, this is amazing. I want to do this all the time, which I still feel like that is the case, but is in a little bit more of a reasonable manner. And then I was expecting that I probably wouldn't go back to statistics for a while. I was like, okay, well, I'll write a couple of new ones. Then that November, I learned that I had gotten the new musical prize at Fringe. Yay. And I was, in theory, I was supposed to go up in 2020, but we all know that didn't happen. We went up in 2022. So then I was kind of faced with the fact that, I have to edit the show so soon. Like, it still feels like I don't quite know what to do with it. And that's when I brought in some dramaturgical help and talked to a couple different people about it. So that was a shorter turnaround time than I normally would take, because for my other shows, for Connections and 18 Palace Road, after they went up for the first time, I ignored them for years before I actually went back to them. Granted, I don't know if it would have looked different if we didn't have COVID, because the years that I ignored Connections were 2020 and 2021, and I don't think much was going to happen there. Mm-hmm. But I do feel like when I went back to it about 2 to 3 years later, kind of between late 2021 and late 2022 is when I actually edited and worked on it. I think before that I just wouldn't have known what to do with it. And I do think by the time I went back to it, I had enough space from it that I thought, okay, this is what I know what to do with this now.
Yeah. So when you put up a show, you see it so many times.
Exactly. And you're like, it's a mix of, okay, I know what works and what doesn't, and a mix of this is just the way it is, like this is the show. Yeah. And I do feel like with the most recent edition of Connections that we had, that it's much, much closer to what I'd like it to be finally. Like I genuinely feel like that's the show of mine that is probably in the strongest space right now, like at the strongest point. And then 18 Palace Road is another one that we went to October 2021, and I have ignored it ever since. And now it's like slowly, oh yeah, you did. Yeah. Did you see it online or in person?
In person.
Oh, excellent. And now it's like slowly percolating in my brain of like, okay, I think we could do something with this. And we're at the 1.5 year plus mark. Mm-hmm. And statistics now, because I'm going through a developmental process with Shifting Ground Collective, where we put on a stage reading, we're going to put on a full workshop, and then a full production in 3 consecutive years. That has kind of forced me to. It is very exciting. They're a very cool organization. I will put the link to check them out as well. That has kind of made me go back into the constantly thinking and reframing space, which is good. So I think by default, my editing process is ignore and come back with fresh eyes. But with statistics, and to an extent with the last piece, it's nice to know that to kind of reframe it in my mind as this is all really malleable and this can all continue to change, and this is one version of the show. It's not which I know in my heart, but it's nice to not get fully stuck in not being able to see it any differently.
It takes the pressure off.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I find if I'm writing something and it's in my brain of this has to be the final version, then it just it stops me. It sort of puts up a wall and stops me from being creative.
Exactly.
Yeah. And even if I know it's going to be the final version, I have to tell myself this is just a draft. You know, like this could always, you could always go back.
And also, like, final version for now doesn't have to mean final version forever.
That's so
I guess
true.
that's more the case for theater. I think songs that you know, record and release and stream are different, but theater, like this production, you know, yes, it's the final version, as you're not going to tell people to change things at dress rehearsal, but a later production, which I hope to have for any of these shows, can be different, and that's fine, because, like, productions change all the time.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you were applying to a lot of grants to make these musicals happen. So I guess A is, where did you look for grants and what was the process in applying to them? And B is, when you received a grant, how was your, like, process in budgeting everything?
This is grants are such an elusive topic, and the people who really know grants will tell you it's very formulaic. I don't really know grants, so I don't think it's formulaic. But it's good to hear my friends who know grants say it's formulaic, because I'm like, maybe one day I will know them. So I primarily applied through to two pools. I applied to Ontario Arts Council, has something called Recommender Grants for Theatre Creators, which is basically like OAC has the money, and a lot of the theatre companies in, I think, all through Ontario, but a lot of them are congregated in Toronto. It's almost like they will recommend you for a grant. Like, they'll pick maybe 6 applications for, they're not massive amounts for a theater project. It's between 1,000 to 3,000 usually. They'll pick you, kind of give you to OAC and say, like, hey, give this person money for this project. And OAC's like, okay. And they give it to you. So those are great for my purposes, because, like, they're exactly that. They're for theater creators. They're for writers. So that's me. I'm not well versed in production. I'm not well versed in like budgets and directing and all that. But I'm a writer. That's what I do. So this is really perfect, because the app is almost largely like, okay, what's the story you want to tell? And there's a little bit of question of, like, what will you do with the money? But realistically, majority of this is used to, like, just pay yourself to write that. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but a lot of the times, like, they don't put pressure on you to come up with an itemized budget for that, because they know it's largely going to be payment for yourself. So you can apply to 5 of those per year. Most people, I think you can't be a full-time undergrad student. There was some confusion, I remember, this year of, like, are med students allowed? And I was like, please allow me. I'm going to be in school forever. I would like to be eligible for grants, because I'm working in the professional sphere as a theater creator. Thankfully, that worked out fine. So yeah, this was my second year of eligibility. I didn't apply to many last year, but did the full 5 this year. So that's one that I think I'll keep going back to. I have also looked at the Ontario Arts Council, like, theater projects, but those are a lot more involved and probably should be written by a team, like a production team. So I've applied to those. The theater projects have not gotten them, but I did get 2 recommenders this year. One for The Last Piece, and one for another show about the partition of India and like, kind of Indian diaspora that I'm hoping to develop in the future. That one barely exists right now, which is why I'm not talking about it. But
it's exciting. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Eventually, one of these days.
Yeah.
So that's OAC, and that money, the amount I got for The Last Piece, is going to be used for a mix of, like, production expenses, honoraria, all sorts of things for this production that we have coming up. And then I also, because I'm still a student at U of T, I have access to some student grants, not the faculty music ones, because I've graduated. And a lot of the medicine ones aren't super relevant for the kind of work I do. Like, they're not artistic grants. But I was a School of Graduate Studies student as well, because of a diploma I'm doing. And so I applied to one of their kind of, like, sponsorship and initiative funds for The Last Piece, and we got that one as well. So that's also going to be adding mainly to production costs. Honestly, I didn't do the budget. I brought on an absolutely fantastic production manager who is or production manager and a producer, 2 different fantastic friends that I've worked on with, worked with on theater before, and they made the budget together, which is great, because they're so much better at it than me.
Have you, because I'm just, like, going off of my own experience, something that was really difficult for me when I was first applying to things and getting money to do stuff was doing it for the first time, it's like the grants require, a lot of them require you to know how much things cost, but because you haven't done it before, you don't know how much things cost. Do you relate to that?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the little experience with budgets I had before was like for student theater, you would have to submit a budget of like, this is what I will expect the show will cost. But those are relatively straightforward because you're not worried about like paying people artist fees. You're not worried about insurance. A lot of that is covered by the fact that you're a student production. So honestly, a lot of mine was like looking up Long and McQuaid rental amounts and then like guesstimating based on talking to people. And now that's primarily what I do. Like I will talk to people and get people who are better at it than I am. Like working with people who know the craft better than you. Which has been, I think, a big learning point for me in my entire artistic career. Like, I tend to be such, like, a lone wolf for a mix of, like, I want to do this exactly how I want to do it, and I want to do it on my terms and my timeline, and I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to get someone else to commit to this thing that's mine. But I think it's so important to get people who work well, that you like working with, and are willing to work on stuff with you, and also engage that, like to put that same like reciprocity forward to them. Like if you're willing to do good work on their projects, they'll do it for you. And I feel like I've found a lot of those really great people, and I'm very thankful for that. Yeah, I think that's a big part of budgeting, just like asking people things. As for, I think you had asked about like where to find grants as well. OAC, TAC, and then Canada Council for the Arts has some of those big boy ones. The one that we got, the Canada Council grant that we got for statistics, I had very little part in writing. This was, again, the fantastic members of Shifting Ground Collective, who have now been shouted out for the third time, who wrote this, and I gave them whatever information they need. So I think that kind of brings up my past point, like get people who are good at this stuff around you, get good grant writers as friends, get people who like doing it, because they do exist, surprisingly, because I don't like doing that stuff. But I think that will always make for a stronger application and a stronger overall project.
Yeah. How far in advance would you typically have to plan ahead between, writing the grant, receiving the response, and then being able to put on the musical?
Because I haven't been at the forefront of a grant that was actually like a theater project grant to put on a full like professional level musical. That timeline I'm not super sure about. I know it will be like usually the response time is around 3 months, if not more, for some of these grants. Let's see, what was it? For statistics, it might have been even more. Yeah, because that was a Canada Council, so I think that was more like 4 months. But OAC is usually about 3 months, 3.5. For the recommenders and for the level of kind of where the last piece is operating, where like, yes, we're operating as a professional show, but people are getting honorarium pay. It's a lot of double duty. Like we're an indie professional show. For something like that, like the turnaround time could be a little less, because also that depends so much on things that work on the fly. Like, if you're getting your venue for free or for a small donation, depends on when they're available, when they're going to get back to you. Some of these other grants and then these smaller grants usually will have a shorter response time. Like I think I heard back from the recommenders in about 2 months, a little less, like 7 weeks, and the school grant in about a month. So much of that I think is like being flexible and adaptable and thinking like, okay, we want to make this work, and it's primarily for the love of developing a new show. We're not paying people big bucks out of this. In fact, the money there is very much an idea of like, hey, we respect your time as a professional artist, not like this is an hourly equivalent pay of everything you put into the show. I wish I could pay people that, but unfortunately I'm not at that level yet. One day, hopefully. So I think like planning ahead as much as possible is great. Thinking like, okay, maybe I'd like to do, let's see, we're now in May. Thinking like, okay, maybe I'd like to do a show in December, January. Even that's probably a little bit short, but planning as much as possible, coming forward with a plan, and then being flexible based on what you get is, I think, so key for indie theater. Like for Connections, I thought for a long time that we would be putting it on at my old high school in like maybe late April, early May. and doing it as a mix of educational workshops with them. And that didn't end up working out for a variety of reasons. But then my conversations with Trin came to a head of, hey, can you be the next show in our season? And that was a full month earlier. Like, that was going up middle of March, a full month earlier than we were supposed to. And we adapted, and we pivoted to that. So that was, so I think that's a big part of it. It's not as much about planning ahead as it is about, like, being flexible and chasing as many opportunities as possible.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have my last 2 questions that I'm asking everyone. So the first question is, when you were sort of just beginning your journey as an artist, is there a resource or a piece of information that you know now that you wish you had at that time? Or, like, what would you tell your younger self, basically?
My younger self? I guess I can think of me beginning my time as an artist, both, like, arguably it could be, like, before undergrad, but I guess undergrad is a pretty good starting point for most people. But for me, it almost feels like third year when I started writing musical theater is a beginning point. I think always look, and I did a little bit of this for classical, but I didn't start doing this for musical theater until probably later than I should have. Always just, like, looking for random, like, opportunities, competitions, places to submit your things to. Even if you look up, like, musical theater, like, new musical competition kind of thing. That's not really a thing, actually, but, like, script submissions, call for scripts, call for scores. That applies more to the classical field as well. Or, like, joining different, like, Facebook groups for Toronto theater, getting to know different people in the field. All of this will help you understand. I think basically putting in the initiative to know what the opportunity, like, the landscape of opportunity looks like, and then putting yourself out there. Because I think in music school it's so easy, because you have so much to do in school, it's so easy to focus all your time on what you're doing for school, but ultimately
being in that bubble.
Exactly, yeah, it really does. And, like, it's great. I mean, I love my time at music school, but ultimately as an artist, like, it's never too early to start. And if you fail, that's okay. Like, I get so many rejections all the time. We all do. It's part of it. But then, like, the most, like, bizarre and random yeses will end up, like, maybe some of the best opportunities. So I think if you know, like, now there's still so much I need to know, but now I can tell you, like, okay, fringes, like, the fringe competitions open up by October, or like they're due by October. Playwrights Guild of Canada's due April, May. Fringe lotteries open up at a certain time. And, like, just all sorts of other, like, that's more stuff that I know now. And most of those are because I, like, threw an application in on a whim, and sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But now I know. So I think, yeah, that's what I would suggest. And it looks different for every field. Like, for theater, obviously I could give you specifics. If you're, like, a classical performer, I don't think I could tell you, but doing the research and talking to people to find out opportunities, even if they seem super far out, and then just trying them, because it puts you on the map and it makes you know your own city and the industry better.
That's awesome. That's really good advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you meet a lot of new people through that.
Exactly.
Even if it's just, like, going to a campus theater show, you end up meeting this whole community of people who are doing the same thing as you.
Yeah, the campus theater community is one that's, like, it's palpable in that way, because it's not one major of people. It's not even all people who are at U of T, but it's such a strong bond that everyone has.
Yeah, it's a very wholesome community. And last question is, do you have any music or song recommendations?
Oh.
It could be anything.
Anything. Wow. Okay, well, I'll shout out my top 3? I'll do top 3 favorite musicals. The third place spot keeps switching around, because it depends on whether we're going for, like, a nostalgia vibe or, like, a classical vibe. My favorite musical of all time is In the Heights. I would recommend both listening to the Broadway soundtrack and watching the movie. It's probably everyone will know Hamilton. This is Lin-Manuel Miranda's first show before he wrote Hamilton, almost 10 years before, I think. And it's great. It's like a beautifully authentic and just really touching story for everyone. And it has some bops, so I would suggest In the Heights. musical number 2 is Come From Away. I think people will probably be familiar with that. Another beautifully authentic story. And then musical number 3, as I said, shifts around, but I just finished playing a production of it, so I'm going to shout out Fun Home. It's a very interesting type of musical in that it doesn't really follow your classic structure at all. And even playing it in Pitt, like I played a decent number of musicals in Pitt, and it felt very different. But it's just, it's really like such an interesting retelling of the story because it does so many things you wouldn't expect. So I would recommend all of those. I know that's like 3 hours of listening, but you don't have to listen to all of them. Just try it.
Yeah.
Just try it.
Well, I want to make a playlist of everything, so I'm very seriously considering just adding the entire
soundtrack
to all 3.
Oh, you could. Maybe just pick the ones that have the most plays. Like I trust the people of Spotify to pick good ones.
That's true. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the very first episode of the Bedroom Studios podcast. Don't forget to add this podcast to your playlist and like and follow us on social media at Bedroom Studios Podcast. I will be also linking Shreya's social media in the description. You should definitely check out her music, plays, and other projects. And make sure to follow our playlist of guest music recommendations. Everything will be linked in the description. And new episodes of the podcast will be released every Thursday, so stay tuned for next week. I hope to see you there.